Rain hammers the glass of a tower one man built with his own hands. And that same man is on his knees at the bottom of it, in a stranger's boots, scrubbing another man's coffee from the marble. Nobody knows his face. That's the point. They step over him. They talk above his head, cruel and careless. Certain the man with the mop can't hear a thing, but he hears everything, every whisper, every name, every small cruelty they think will never cost them. A woman in heels calls him useless and walks away. He swallows it. He keeps scrubbing, because behind those cheap glasses is a secret worth more than the whole gleaming building. A secret that the moment it breaks will bring every last one of them to their knees beside him. And somewhere far above, in an empty office, a nameplate still bears a name. His name. The mop goes still. The rain started an hour before Ellison Vance became a nobody. He didn't know it yet. He was standing in the lobby of the very building he owned, a mop in his hands, water pooling around scuffed work boots that weren't his. Not really. Boots he'd bought 2 days ago from a discount store where the cashier never once looked up at him, which honestly should have been his first lesson. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me back up. To understand how a man worth more money than a small country ended up on his knees scrubbing a coffee stain out of marble, while a woman in heels called him useless, you have to understand who Ellison Vance was before the rain, before the mop, before the boots. At 45, he had the kind of life people put on vision boards. A corner office on the top floor of Halcyon Systems glass on 3 sides. The whole city laid out beneath him like something he'd been given permission to admire. A company he'd built from a single room and a stubborn idea. A wife who still laughed at his terrible jokes. A future so bright it practically hummed. And a stomach that had been in knots for 3 weeks straight. He couldn't explain it. That was the maddening part. Every number was up. Every chart pointed the right direction. The board was thrilled, the investors were purring. The press was writing the kind of headlines you frame. Except something was wrong. Somewhere down in the machinery of the thing he'd made a gear was grinding. He could feel it, the way you feel weather in an old injury. No proof, just the ache. So that Monday morning, he called a meeting. 2 people came. Karen from People Operations, tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. And Daniel, his second-in-command, already smiling the smile of a man about to explain away bad news. "Just tell me," Ellison said. Karen swiped to a chart, then hesitated, which told him everything before the number did. "Satisfaction's down," she said. 15 points. From last quarter. From last year. Silence. The kind that has weight. Daniel jumped in, because Daniel always jumped in. "Growth pains, Ellison. We doubled headcount. You stretch a thing that fast, it groans a little. It's normal." "And the comments?" Ellison asked. "The written ones. What are people actually saying?" Karen looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the window. And Karen, God bless her, decided to be honest. "They used the word toxic," she said quietly. "More than once. Favoritism. Overworked. One person wrote that they've worked here 3 years, and no one above them knows their name. 3 years. And no one knew their name." Ellison stood. Walked to the glass. Below him, tiny people moved between tiny buildings, each one carrying a whole life he'd never once considered. "There's a thing my old mentor used to say," he murmured. "Half to them, half to the window. You don't know a company until you've walked a mile in the shoes of its lowest paid worker." Behind him, Daniel laughed. "Poetic. What are you gonna do, hand out surveys again? No, Ellison said, and turned around. I'm going to become one. You should have seen their faces. Daniel's smile cracked right down the middle. Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again, like a fish who'd just been told the water was optional. I'm sorry, Daniel said. Become one, what? A janitor. Ellison was already pacing now the idea catching fire as he spoke it the way the good ones always did. We contract the cleaning crew through an outside agency. Nobody here would blink at a new hire. I show up Monday, I mop floors, I empty trash, and I listen. You're the CEO, Karen said faintly, which is exactly why no one will look twice at me holding a mop. He smiled, and it was the first real smile in weeks. People don't see the help, Karen. That's the whole tragedy. That's the thing I need to understand. Daniel tried logic. Daniel loved logic. Your face is on the wall in the lobby, Ellison. Your face is in the annual report. You can't just... A beard, Ellison said. Glasses. Different hair. A name nobody's heard. Give me a week. 1 week. And if I find out everything's fine, I'll come back up here and buy you both lunch and never mention it again. Karen swallowed. And if it's not fine? The room got quiet. Then we've got work to do, Ellison said. Real work. The kind that doesn't show up on your charts. He should have felt triumphant. He felt terrified. But he'd learned over the years that those two feelings usually meant he was about to do something that mattered. That night he told Marion. He'd rehearsed it in the car. A whole speech about culture and blind spots and moral obligation. He got about 4 words in before his wife set down her wine and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. You're going to do what? Mop floors. For a week. Undercover. At the company. And here's where he expected the argument. The you're insane. The you have a board meeting Thursday. The what will people think? Instead, Marion went very still, and her eyes went somewhere far away. I did that once, she said softly. He blinked. Did what? Cleaned buildings. Nights. Before you knew me. She turned her wedding ring slow around her finger. A habit from a life he'd never seen. You were in graduate school. We had nothing. So I took a night shift scrubbing office towers downtown, and I never told you because you had enough to carry. Ellison sat down, because his legs suddenly weren't sure about holding him. 30 years he'd been married to this woman. 30 years. And he'd never known. Marion, let me finish. She reached across and took his hand, and her grip was stronger than he remembered. I know exactly what it feels like to be invisible in a room full of people. To wipe down a desk while someone stands 2 feet away and talks about you like you're furniture. To go home at 3 in the morning and cry in the shower where no one can hear you, and then get up and do it again. The rain outside had started. He could hear it now, tapping the glass. As if you're going to do this, Marion said, and her voice caught just slightly. You do it right. You don't go down there to collect data, Ellison. You don't treat them like a problem to be solved. Then how? She squeezed his hand. You look at them like they're people, she said. Because they are. And they've been waiting a very long time for someone up there to remember it. He didn't sleep much that night. He lay in the dark and listened to the woman beside him. Breathe, this woman, he'd apparently only half known, and he thought about all the years he'd spent believing he understood the world from the top of it. Morning came, gray and wet. He dressed in the small quiet before dawn. The stiff work pants, the cheap gray shirt with someone else's dignity ironed into it. He glued on the beard, adjusted the heavy glasses, mussed his hair into something ordinary. And when he looked in the bathroom mirror, a stranger looked back. Charlie the Badge said, "New hire, facilities, Charlie who nobody knew, Charlie who nobody owed anything." Marion appeared in the doorway, robe pulled tight, watching him with a small, sad smile. "You look terrible," she said. "Thank you. I packed you a lunch." She held up a brown paper bag. "Because they don't pay these men enough to eat well, and I'll be damned if my husband learns humility on an empty stomach." He kissed her, held her a second longer than usual. "What if I made all of this?" he whispered. "The whole thing. The cruelty. What if it's mine?" Marion pulled back, looked at him. "Then you're the only man in that building brave enough to go find out," she said. "Now go." The drive over felt like a dream someone else was having. He'd made this trip 10,000 times, but never like this. He parked a far corner of the lot, the section with the oldest cars, the section he'd never once noticed in 20 years. He shouldered a worn backpack. He walked toward a door he'd never used, the employee door, the one around the side. His heart was going like a drum. This was the moment, the point of no return. Past that door, Ellison Vance didn't exist. Only Charlie. Only the mop and the bucket and whatever waited at the bottom of the thing he'd built. The security guard barely glanced up. Badge. Ellison fumbled it. Actually fumbled it, hands shaking, and the guard sighed the way you sigh at the slow and the small. "First day," Ellison managed. "Sorry." The guard waved him through without a word, without a look. Without one flicker of the deference, Ellison had swum in like warm water for 2 decades. And just like that, nothing. The doors closed behind him. The elevator dropped him down below the lobby, below the world he knew, into a basement of harsh light and old paint and the smell of industrial soap. A place he owned and had never once set foot in. A gruff woman waited there, 50s maybe, a face that had stopped expecting to be impressed a long time ago. "You the new one?" she asked. "Charlie," he said. "Yes, ma'am." She looked him up and down, slow, unhurried, the way you appraise something you're not sure will last the week. "Alma," she said, "grab a cart. And Charlie—" She was already turning away. "Don't thank me yet." He grabbed a cart. His hands, he noticed, had stopped shaking. And somewhere far above him, in a corner office wrapped in glass, a nameplate still read, "Ellison Vance, CO," catching the gray morning light of a man who for the first time in his life had gone looking for the truth. Whatever it cost him. Whatever he found. Alma didn't believe in wasting words. Ellison learned that in the first 10 minutes. She handed him a mop like she was handing him a life sentence, walked him through the supply closet without slowing down once, and rattled off a list of chemicals and codes and floor assignments so fast he had to bite down on the urge to ask her to repeat it. Because Charlie wouldn't ask twice. Charlie needed this job. And a man who needed a job learned to catch things the first time. "Lobby first," Alma said. "Then you work your way up. Odd floors today, even tomorrow. Don't touch anything on the executive level unless someone tells you to. Those people—" She paused, and something crossed her face, brief and bitter. "Those people don't like reminders that the building needs cleaning." "Got it," Ellison said. Alma stopped. Turned, looked at him with those tired, appraising eyes. "You don't got it," she said. "Not yet, but you will." And then softer almost to herself. "Everybody thinks it's about the mopping. It's never about the mopping. She left him there. Alone in a basement he owned, holding a bucket he'd never filled in a building where his own face hung framed on the lobby wall 4 floors up. He rode the elevator to the ground floor and stepped out into his own kingdom as a ghost. The lobby of Halcyon Systems was a cathedral of glass and light. He'd designed it that way on purpose years ago, back when he still believed that beauty and openness were the same thing. Morning sun poured through the atrium. Employees streamed in badges, swinging coffee cups, sweating faces lit blue by the phones they never looked up from. And not one of them saw him. He started mopping. Slow at first, then finding a rhythm the way your body finds any rhythm if you let it. He mopped, and he watched. Which was the whole point. Which was why he was here. A young woman in a sharp blazer, clipped past phone, pressed to her ear, and without breaking stride, without so much as a glance, she pointed at a spill by the elevator bank. "That needs cleaning," she said. "To the air. To him. To no one." And walked on. Ellison stood there a moment. 30 seconds ago, he'd been a man whose name opened every door in this building. And now he was a hand that held a mop, a function, a fixture. He cleaned the spill. By mid-morning, he'd learned the choreography of invisibility, the way people angled their bodies away from him in the elevator, the way conversations continued right through him, secrets and gossip spilling out, because who cares what the janitor hears? The mumbled thank yous that weren't really thank yous, just noises people made to feel decent while looking at their screens. He held a door for a group of engineers. Not one made eye contact. He moved his cart aside for a woman carrying files. She said sorry to the cart, not to him, to the cart. And Marion's voice came back to him from the dark of last night. To wipe down a desk while someone stands 2 feet away and talks about you like you're furniture. He'd thought he understood what she meant. He hadn't. Not until now. Not until his own body was the furniture. The cafeteria came alive at noon. He wheeled his cart between tables, wiping surfaces, emptying bins, and the conversations washed over him like radio he wasn't supposed to hear. But heard. All of it. Only pulling from the top 10 schools for the new team, obviously. It's not what you know, it's who your mentor golfs with. I mean, she's competent, but competent isn't the point, is it? He slowed near a table of managers. His managers. People he'd promoted, trusted, taken to dinners, shaken hands with at holiday parties. He kept his head down and wiped a spotless table twice. "If one more person from support sends me a feelings email," one of them was saying, "I'm going to scream. They're like toddlers. Everything's a crisis." Laughter. Easy, warm, cruel laughter. "Try marketing," another said. "Had a junior come to me yesterday with some idea about I don't even remember. Something about the product. Kid's been here 6 weeks and thinks he's the visionary." That's the problem with this generation. No patience. Ellison wiped the table a 3rd time. His jaw ached from clenching it. These were his people. This was how they talked when they thought no one who mattered was listening. Except someone was. He carried that ache up to the 7th floor after lunch. Engineering. And that's where he saw her. She was older. 60-something, silver hair, pinned back neat, sitting at a desk in the corner that everyone else's desks seemed to point away from. She worked quietly, efficiently, her hands moving over the keyboard with the unhurried certainty of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. And Ellison recognized something in her posture. A carefulness. The particular stillness of a person who has learned to take up as little space as possible. I was cleaning near her when the young ones came by. 3 of them, coffees in hand, mid-conversation, and one of them jerked his chin at the woman's desk and said, not quite quietly enough, "Careful, don't wake the fossil." Snickers. The woman's hand stopped on the keyboard, just for a second. "Bet she was here when they invented the wheel," another added, and they all laughed, and one of them said, "Winnie the dinosaur," like it was the funniest thing in the world, and they drifted off toward the break room, trailing their own hilarity behind them. Winnie. She didn't turn around, didn't say a word. She just sat there very straight and slowly put her hands back on the keys. But Ellison, close enough to see, watched her fingers tremble, watched her blink hard twice at the screen, watched a woman older than his own mother swallow a humiliation she'd clearly swallowed 100 times before, and something in his chest cracked open. I knew that name now. Winnie. And later he'd learn the rest, that she'd been one of the first people through the door in the early years, back when the company was small enough to remember everyone, back when he still knew every face on the payroll. She'd been there almost from the beginning. His beginning. His company. His fault. I wanted to walk over. He wanted to say something, anything, to put his hand on her shoulder, and tell her that the boys who mocked her would be gone by Friday, and she would be honored by Monday. But Charlie couldn't do that. Charlie was a janitor with a cart, so he did the only thing he could. He cleaned near her longer than he needed to, and when he finally moved on, he caught her eye, just for a moment, and he did the thing Marion had told him to do. He looked at her like she was a person. Winnie blinked, startled, as if she'd forgotten what that felt like, and she gave him the smallest nod. A nod between two invisible people in a building full of the blind. The afternoon wore on, and the worst was still coming. I was on the executive floor by late day, the one place he'd been told to avoid, but the crew was short, and Alma had radioed him up to handle a conference room. He was dusting a bookshelf when he heard the heels, sharp, fast. The sound of someone who has never once in her life worried about being in someone else's way. Adele Marsh rounded the corner phone to her ear, and Ellison knew her instantly. Head of operations. He'd promoted her himself 4 years back because she'd been fierce and hungry, and he'd genuinely believed this kind. She'd given a speech at the company retreat once about dignity, about how every single person at Halcyon mattered from the mailroom up. He'd applauded that speech. He'd meant it. "I don't care if she's got a decade here," Adele was saying into the phone voice like a blade. "Coretta doesn't have the image we need for client-facing. She's good with numbers, fine. Keep her in the back with the numbers. But you don't put a woman who looks like that in front of a client." A pause. "Because image is the business, David. That's the whole business. Put the new kid on it. The one with the smile. He's been here 5 minutes, but he photographs well, and that's worth more than 10 years of competence any day." She hung up, and she saw him. For half a second, Ellison's heart stopped. Would she know him? Would the beard hold? Would 20 years of standing across boardroom tables from this woman betray him now? But Adele's eyes swept over him the way you sweep over a lamp. A chair. A thing in the room that isn't a person. "Move," she said. He stepped back. Too fast. His elbow caught the edge of the cart, and the whole thing tipped spray bottles, rags a bucket that hit the marble with a crack, and sent gray water spreading across the floor in a slow, awful bloom. The silence after was enormous. Adele looked down at the water creeping toward her shoes, then up at him, and her face, the face that had given a speech about dignity, curdled into something Ellison would remember for the rest of his life. "Are you serious?" she said. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'll—" He was already on his knees grabbing rags, sopping at the flood. Sarkovus, Adele said, stepping over him, like he was a puddle himself. Have actual work to do. Do you have any idea how much the people on this floor make per hour? And you're down there playing in a puddle. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't. She stood over him, and she did not offer a hand, and she did not soften, and she delivered the line that would ring in his ears for a week. Honestly, if this is the best you can manage, maybe you should find work that doesn't require skills, or standards, or a functioning pair of hands. And she walked away, heels clicking. Not one look back. Ellison stayed on his knees, on the floor of the company he'd built in front of a woman he'd trusted, soaking up dirty water with a rag, while his own name hung on the wall 4 floors below. His face was hot. His throat was tight, and the anger that rose in him was so pure and so total that for one wild second, he almost stood up and said I own this. I own you. I own the ground you're standing on. But he didn't, because Marion's voice was in his head again. You don't go down there to collect data. You look at them like they're people. And kneeling in the wet, he understood something no boardroom could ever have taught him. That cruelty like Adele's didn't come from monsters. It came from people who'd simply stopped seeing. He'd built the ladder. He'd handed her the rungs. He gathered his supplies. Slowly. And as he did, a voice above him, gentle, made him look up. It was a man, mid-30s, kind-eyed, already crouching down to help gather the scattered rags without being asked. Ellison would learn his name soon enough. Desmond from IT, the man who knew every security guard by name, and helped the mailroom carry heavy boxes, and had a way of making the smallest person in the room feel seen. Don't let her get to you, Desmond said quietly, stacking bottles back on the cart. She's like that with everybody now. It's not you. Thanks, Ellison managed. Desmond stood, offered a hand, pulled him up. And then he looked at Ellison, really looked the way almost no one in this building had all day, and shook his head at something sad and far away. It didn't used to be like this here, Desmond said. This place used to stand for something. He picked up his own bag, ready to go. Sometimes I wonder if anybody up top even remembers what. And he walked off toward the elevators, leaving Ellison standing there, in the drying water, holding a mop undone. Because somebody up top did remember. Somebody up top was standing right here in cheap boots and a stranger's beard, learning exactly how far his company had fallen from the thing he'd dreamed it into being. That night he drove home in silence. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't call anyone. He parked in the far corner of the lot again, out of habit already, and he sat there a long moment before he could make himself move. His hands hurt. His back hurt. But that wasn't it. That wasn't what kept him in the car. It was Winnie's trembling fingers, and the manager's easy laughter, and Adele stepping over him like he was nothing, and Desmond's quiet question hanging in the air. Sometimes I wonder if anybody up top even remembers. He remembered now. God help him, he remembered. He pulled out a small notebook, and under the dome light, in the parking lot of the company he'd built from a single room, Ellison Vance began to write down everything he'd seen. Every name, every wound, every small cruelty he'd let take root while he stood on the top floor admiring the view. And when he was done, he looked at the list. Long, longer than he'd feared, but at the very top he'd written 3 words, underlined twice. They deserve better. He drove home to Marion, and to the second day, and to whatever the bottom of his company still had left to teach him. The second day, Ellison came in early, before the sun, before the coffee, before the building filled with people who wouldn't see him. He'd decided something in the dark of last night, lying next to Marion, listening to her breathe. He'd decided that if he was going to do this, he'd do it all the way down. Not just the floors, the people, the lives underneath the badges, the ones his charts had never once counted. So he came in early, and that's how he found Coretta. The finance floor was nearly empty at that hour. Screens sleeping, chairs pushed in. But one desk glowed a single lamp, a single figure hunched beneath it. A woman with tired eyes and a scarf still wrapped around her shoulders, like she hadn't decided whether she was staying or going. Ellison wheeled his cart in quietly, pretended to empty a bin that was already empty, and listened. She was talking to herself. Low, urgent. "That's not right," she murmured, dragging a finger down a column of numbers on her screen. That can't be right. If nobody catches this now." She rubbed her eyes, picked up her phone, dialed. "Hi, Mrs. Ibarra. I'm so sorry to call this early." Her voice softened into something apologetic, something worn smooth from too much use. I know Marcus has his game today. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't. I just need those files before 9, and I can't. Yes. Thank you. I owe you. I owe you so much." She hung up and sat there a moment staring at nothing. Then she pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes and breathed. One long breath. The kind you take when crying isn't an option, but your body's asking anyway. Ellison had seen 1,000 spreadsheets in his life. He'd built an empire on them. But he had never once, not one single time, thought about the woman on the other end of the numbers. The one who stayed late, so the numbers were true. The one who missed her son's game so his company wouldn't lose a fortune it would never thank her for. He watched Coretta work for the better part of an hour. Watched her find an error buried 6 layers deep, a decimal in the wrong place. A mistake that could have cost Halcyon millions. Watched her fix it, document it, leave careful notes for a team that would arrive in 3 hours and never know how close they'd come. Watched her do it all with the quiet, invisible excellence of someone who had long ago stopped expecting to be seen. Around 8, she started packing up, and Ellison, who knew he was pushing his luck, who knew Charlie should keep his head down, couldn't help himself. "Long night," he said. Coretta startled, then looked at him. The janitor, the fixture with a flicker of surprise that someone had spoken to her at all. "Every night," she said with a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There's always more, and someone's got to do it." "Somebody notices, though," Ellison offered. "Work like that. They must." And Coretta laughed, soft, bitter, the saddest sound he'd heard in years. "Noticed." She shook her head, shouldering her bag. "I've been passed over 3 times, Charlie. 3. You know what they told me the last time? That I'm not a culture fit. Because I don't come to the after-work drinks. Because I go home to my son instead of laughing at the boss's jokes at happy hour." She pulled her scarf tighter. "I've caught mistakes that saved this company more money than those men make in a decade. But I don't golf. So here I am, still in the back, still invisible." She headed for the elevator, then stopped, turned back. "Thanks for asking, though," she said. And there was something raw in it, something almost grateful. Nobody asks. The doors closed, and Ellison stood alone on the finance floor, the weight in his chest growing heavier by the hour. 3 times passed over, because she loved her son more than she loved pretending. He wrote her name in his notebook that morning. Coretta, and under it one word, promote. I didn't yet know how much more her name would come to matter. He couldn't have known. But the notebook was filling page by page with a picture of a company he no longer recognized. The morning brought Sylvester. Ellison found him in the accounting wing, hunched at his desk shoulders, shaking. Crying, the silent, contained kind. The kind grown men learn to do so no one hears. And Ellison stopped his instinct to give the man privacy, warring with the deeper instinct that had brought him down here in the first place. The second instinct won. "You okay, friend?" he asked, quiet. Sylvester's head jerked up. He wiped at his face, fast, embarrassed. "Fine. I'm fine. Allergies." "Sure," Ellison said gently, not believing it and not pretending to. "Can I get you some water?" Sylvester started to shake his head, then stopped, and something in him seemed to give way, the way a dam gives slow at first, then all at once. "Actually," he said, voice thick, "would you sit a minute? I know you're busy. I could use somebody to talk to, and you're the first person who's asked me anything all week." Ellison pulled up a chair. The man was in his 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had spent a lifetime being reliable. And the story came out of him in pieces the way pain does. "Been here 11 years, Sylvester said, staring at his own hands. "Almost from the start, when this place was still small. Gave it everything. Missed my kids growing up. Worked the weekends, the holidays, the nights nobody wanted." He laughed, and it broke apart in the middle. "And now I'm about to lose my house." Ellison went very still. "My wife's sick," Sylvester went on. "Been sick a while. And the bills you don't know you can't know until you're in it. It's like drowning in slow motion. I asked for a raise, just a little. Or some extra hours, anything. And you know what they told me?" "What?" "That there was nothing they could do." His jaw worked. "Nothing. After 11 years. HR gave me a pamphlet. A pamphlet, Charlie. About budgeting. Told me to hang in there." His voice cracked all the way through now. "As if a pamphlet's going to stop the bank from taking my house. As if hang in there is going to fix my wife." And Ellison sat there, and he could not speak. Because 11 years ago, this man had helped build the thing that was now grinding him to dust, because Halcyon Systems had just posted its best quarter in history, and this man who'd helped make that history was going home to a foreclosure notice, and a sick wife, and a pamphlet. He wanted to stand up. He wanted to rip off the beard and the glasses and say, "It's over. It's fixed. Come to my office. We're making this right." But he knew the way. You know a wrong move will shatter everything, that if he broke cover now in this room for this one man, he'd lose the chance to fix it for all of them. So he did the only thing Charlie could do. He put his hand on Sylvester's shoulder, and he stayed. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it in a way Sylvester could never have understood. "This isn't right. Not after everything you've given." Sylvester looked up, eyes wet, and nodded. "You're the first person here who said that. You know that everybody else, it's like we're not even people anymore. Just numbers on somebody's spreadsheet upstairs." The words landed like a blow, because Ellison had been that somebody. For years, he'd looked at spreadsheets and seen efficiency, not exhaustion. Growth, not grief. A company, not the 1,000 aching human lives that made it run. He wrote Sylvester's name that day, too, and beside it, 3 words pressed so hard the pen nearly tore the page. Save his house. The days blurred together after that, and the disguise, so careful, began to fray, not in the beard, not in the glasses, but in the one place Ellison hadn't thought to guard. His hands. It was Alma who noticed. Of course it was Alma. She'd been cleaning buildings for 30 years, and she saw things other people were too busy to see. They were in the supply closet, restocking carts at the end of a shift, and she took the roll of paper towels from him, and her fingers brushed his, and she went still. She turned his hand over in hers, studied it, the soft palm, the smooth, uncalloused skin, the hands of a man who had never in his life done the work she'd done for 3 decades. "Huh," she said. Ellison's heart stopped. Alma looked up at him. Slow. Those tired eyes moving over his face, the beard that didn't quite sit right, the glasses too new, the posture that had never learned to shrink. And Ellison saw the understanding arrive in her piece by piece, the whole picture, assembling behind her eyes. He waited for the accusation. For who are you? For the phone call to security? For the whole thing to come crashing down in a basement supply closet? It didn't come. Instead, Alma let go of his hand, set down the paper towels, and looked at him for a long, long moment. "I don't know who you are," she said quietly, "and I'm not going to ask. That's your business." "Alma, let me finish." She leaned against the metal shelving, arms crossed, and there was something almost tender in her gruffness now. "I've watched you all week, and I've watched a lot of new hires over the years. Most of them, they do the job, and they hate it, and they leave, and I don't blame them. But you—" She shook her head. "You look at people. When Winnie was hurting and everybody walked past, you didn't. When that man in accounting was falling apart, you sat with him. I saw." Ellison couldn't speak. "Whoever you are," Alma said, and her voice dropped low and serious. "Whatever you're doing down here, I don't care. But I've been invisible in these buildings for 30 years. 30. And in all that time, you're one of maybe 3 people who ever looked at me like I was a whole person instead of a mop with legs." She pushed off the shelf, picked up her keys. "So do me one favor," she said at the door. "Wherever you're headed, whatever this is." She fixed him with a look that went straight through him. "Don't lose that. Don't ever lose the way you look at people. Because up there," she pointed at the ceiling, at the floors above, at the whole glittering machine of the company he'd built. "Up there, they lose it. They get high enough, and they forget the rest of us are even down here breathing." And then, she was gone. And Ellison stood alone in the supply closet, undone by the kindness of a woman who cleaned his floors and had just handed him the truest thing anyone had said to him in 20 years. Don't lose the way you look at people. He wrote that down, too, not in the list of names, on its own page, where he'd see it. The next afternoon, Winnie found him. I was cleaning the 7th floor again near her corner when she rolled her chair back and spoke to him. The first time she'd spoken to him at all. "You're the one," she said. Ellison turned. "Ma'am, the new janitor, the one who looked at me." She studied him, silver head tilted, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "The other day, when those boys—" She waved a hand, dismissing them, dismissing the whole cruelty of it. "You looked at me like I mattered. I haven't forgotten." "You do matter," Ellison said, simply, because it was true, and because he was so tired of a world that had forgotten it. Winnie smiled, and for a moment the years fell away from her face. "Sit," she said, nodding at an empty chair. "Just a minute. My knees aren't what they were, and neither, I suspect, is your back." He sat. "I've been here a long time," Winnie said. "Longer than almost anyone. I came on in the early days when this company was just a handful of us in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition." She laughed softly, remembering. "Back then, the man who ran this place, he knew all of us. Every name, every birthday. He used to say the company was only as good as the person it treated worst. Her smile faded. I don't know what happened to that man. I don't know what happened to any of it. Ellison's throat closed, because he knew exactly what happened to that man. That man was sitting right here in a stranger's clothes, listening to a woman describe the person he used to be. The person he'd lost somewhere on the way up. They call me the dinosaur, Winnie said, and her voice didn't waver, though her hands did. The fossil. Like being old is something I did to them. Like showing up faithfully for nearly 20 years is a joke. She looked at him. But I remember when this place had a heart, Charlie. I remember. And some days that's the only reason I keep coming in. Somebody has to remember. She patted his knee, rolled her chair back to her desk. Anyway, she said briskly, blinking hard. Don't mind an old woman's rambling. Go on, before someone yells at you for talking to the fossil. But Ellison didn't move. Not right away. He sat there in the corner, everyone pointed away, from next to a woman who had watched his company lose its soul. And he made himself a promise, so fierce it frightened him. Whatever it took, however hard, he was going to give that heart back. I didn't get the chance to plan it. Because the next morning, everything broke at once. He was mopping the 3rd floor when he felt it. Before he understood it. A shift in the air. A sudden charge. The particular electric panic of a building where something has gone very wrong. Phones buzzing all at once. People half standing at their desks. Voices rising sharp and scared. The client data. It's everywhere, it's already out. How did nobody catch this? How did... Ellison's blood went cold. Because he knew. Before anyone said it, he knew. The security hole. The one Desmond had been raising all week, the flaw in the new system. The warning that had been buried and dismissed and waved away in the name of image and speed, and a deadline that mattered more than the truth. It had blown open. And customer data, thousands of people's private information, was pouring out into the world. He found Desmond in the eye of it, surrounded by a knot of panicking managers, his face gray. The same supervisor who'd dismissed him days ago was shouting now, red-faced, demanding to know how this happened. And Desmond, quiet, devastated, said the words that would end Ellison's disguise for good. I told you, Desmond said. Not shouting, barely above a whisper which made it worse. I told all of you, 2 weeks ago. I put it in writing. I said if we rushed this system, we'd expose every client we have. And you told me to be a team player. His voice shook. You told me to see the bigger picture. The supervisor sputtered. The managers looked at each other. And somewhere in the chaos, someone said the word that turned panic into terror, lawsuit. And someone else said board. And someone else said, we need to reach the CEO right now, wherever he is. And Ellison Vance, standing there in a janitor's uniform with a mop in his hands, watching a good man take the blame for a warning that everyone above him had ignored, understood that the week was over. The listening was done, because a man like Desmond was about to be thrown to the wolves for being right. Because Sylvester was going to lose his house while the company bled money it would blame on the wrong people. Because Coretta and Winnie and Alma and every invisible soul in this building deserved a leader who would stand up, not a ghost who watched from behind a mop. He set down the mop. He reached up, and slowly, deliberately, in the middle of the chaos, Ellison Vance took off his glasses and went to find a way to become himself again. He didn't go to security. He didn't call the board. He went home, because a reckoning like this couldn't be done in a stranger's beard and a borrowed name. It had to be done as himself, all of himself, the self he'd nearly forgotten he was. He drove through the gray afternoon with his hands unsteady on the wheel, and Marion met him at the door before he'd even turned the key, because she always knew after 30 years she read him like weather. "It's time," was all he said. And Marion looked at his face, and nodded, and didn't ask a single question because she understood that the man standing in her doorway had just spent a week being crushed under the weight of his own company, and what he needed now wasn't questions. What he needed was to become the person who could carry it. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table until dawn, with his notebook open, and his heart splayed out beside it. Every name, every wound. Coretta, Sylvester, Winnie, Desmond, Alma. The managers laughing in the cafeteria. Adele stepping over him like water. He wasn't writing a speech. He was writing a confession, because that was the thing he'd finally understood. Somewhere between the mop and the marble, and the trembling hands of a woman they called a fossil. This wasn't a story about bad people. It was a story about a good man who stopped paying attention, who let a garden go to rot because he was too busy admiring the view from the balcony. His garden, his rot, his fault. So the confession had to come first. Before anything could be fixed, someone had to stand up and say it out loud. And that someone was him. Morning came, and Ellison Vance put on a suit. Not the janitor's uniform. The real thing. The tailored gray, the crisp shirt, the shoes that cost more than Sylvester's mortgage payment. He stood in front of the mirror and did not recognize himself. Which was strange. For a week he'd worn a disguise, and now, in his own clothes, he felt more like he was wearing a costume than he ever had as Charlie. Marion straightened his tie. Her hands were steady. His weren't. "What if they hate me?" he whispered. And Marion looked up at him, and there was something fierce and soft in her face all at once. "They might," she said, "for a while. You earned that." She smoothed his lapel. "But you're about to do the bravest thing I've ever seen a man do, Ellison. You're about to stand in front of everyone and admit you were wrong. Most men would rather die." She kissed his cheek. "Go tell them the truth. All of it. And then go build something worth working for." He drove to Halcyon Systems as himself. Parked in his own space, the reserved one, the one with his name on the little sign, the one he hadn't touched in a week. And he walked in through the front doors. The executive entrance, the one he'd avoided for 7 days. The security guard, the same one who'd waved Charlie through without a glance, straightened so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. "Mr. Vance, sir. Good morning, sir." And Ellison stopped and looked at him. Really looked. Read the name on his badge for the first time in 20 years of walking past this man. "Good morning, Gerald," he said. "How's your daughter settling into college? You told me she was starting this fall." The guard blinked, stunned, because the CEO had never once known his name, and here he was remembering a conversation Charlie had shared with him 3 days ago, in a hallway over a spilled cart. Gerald didn't recognize Charlie in the man before him, but he recognized being remembered. Yes, sir. She did. Thank you for asking." "I'll want to hear about it sometime," Ellison said, and meant it, and walked on, leaving one more small miracle behind him. By the time he reached his office, the whole building knew he was back. And by the time he'd sent the message, the whole building knew where to be. An all-hands meeting. Main auditorium. 1 hour. Attendance mandatory. The panic over the data breach was still crackling through every floor. And now this. The CEO vanished for a week, suddenly summoning everyone at once. The rumors caught fire. Some said layoffs. Some said the company was being sold. Some said heads were about to roll, and they weren't entirely wrong, though not in the way they feared. Ellison stood backstage and listened to 800 people file in. He could hear them through the curtain. The murmur of them. The nervous laughter. The whispered theories. The shuffle of a workforce that had learned to be afraid of surprises. And his heart was going so hard, he could feel it in his teeth. Because in a minute, he was going to walk out there. And nothing would ever be the same. Which was the point. Which was the whole terrifying point. He peered through the gap in the curtain. And he found them in the crowd, one by one, the faces from his notebook. Desmond, sitting rigid, certain he was about to be fired for the breach, for being right. Coretta, exhausted scarf still around her shoulders, half expecting bad news, because bad news was all this place had ever given her. Sylvester hollow-eyed a man watching his last lifeline about to be cut. Winnie in the back, straight-backed and dignified silver head held high the way it always was even now, even after everything. And Adele, front row. Legs crossed, chin up, radiating the confidence of a woman who has never once imagined the floor might open beneath her. Ellison took a breath and walked out into the light. The room went silent the way rooms do when the pressure changes. 800 faces turned toward him. 800 people who thought they knew this man, this polished CEO in his expensive suit, this figure from the annual report and the lobby wall. They had no idea. "Good morning," Ellison said, and his voice amplified, filled the room. "I know you're frightened. There's a lot happening right now, and I'm going to address all of it. But first I need to tell you a story, and I need you to bear with me, because it's not an easy one to tell." He let the silence stretch. "I want to talk about some of the people who work here," he said. "People I've had the privilege of getting to know recently. People most of us walk past every single day without seeing." He scanned the crowd. "I'd like to start with him in IT. Desmond. Desmond, would you stand up?" The panic that crossed Desmond's face was almost unbearable. The certainty of a man who thinks he's been called out to be blamed. He rose slowly, bracing himself, and the whole room turned to look. "2 weeks ago," Ellison said, "Desmond put a warning in writing. He told us clearly, urgently, in language nobody could misunderstand, that if we rushed the new system, we would expose the private data of every client we serve." He paused. He was ignored. He was told to be a team player. He was told to see the bigger picture. The room shifted, understanding beginning to dawn. "Yesterday," Ellison said quietly, "everything Desmond warned us about came true. The breach you're all out afraid of." He tried to stop it. 2 weeks ago, and the people above him decided that a deadline mattered more than the truth. He looked at Desmond standing there stunned. "You weren't the problem, Desmond," Ellison said. "You were the only one doing your job, and I'm sorry it took me this long to say so. Thank you. Sit down, and know that you're safe here. You'll always be safe here for telling the truth." Desmond sat, and Ellison saw him wipe his eyes, and saw the man beside him clap him on the back, and felt something in his own chest loosen just slightly. One down. So many to go. "There's a woman in finance," Ellison went on. "Coretta. Coretta, please stand." She rose, confused, wary, bracing for a blow. "Coretta comes in before the sun," Ellison said. "She stays long after everyone's gone home. This week alone, she caught an error that would have cost this company millions an error. Nobody else saw, because nobody else looks the way she looks. She has been passed over for promotion 3 times. His voice hardened. "Not because she isn't excellent. She is the most excellent person in her department, and everyone who's honest knows it. She was passed over because she goes home to her son instead of drinking with the right people. Because she wasn't, and I quote, a culture fit. He looked out at 800 faces. Well, he said, I've seen the culture up close this week, and if Coretta isn't a fit for it, then the culture is what's broken, not her. Coretta stood frozen, and Ellison watched her face crumble, not from grief this time, but from the almost unbearable weight of being recognized after so long in the dark. She sat down slowly, and the woman next to her reached over and took her hand. "And there's Winnie," Ellison said, and his voice caught just slightly, because this one was going to cost him. "In the back. Winnie, you don't have to stand. I can see you from here." She stood anyway. Of course she did, dignified to the last. "Winnie has been with this company almost since the beginning," Ellison said. "She was here when it was a handful of us in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and impossible dreams. She has given this place nearly 20 years of her life." He paused. "And this week I watched 3 young men walk past her desk and call her a dinosaur. A fossil. I watched them laugh, and I watched her put her hands back on her keyboard and keep working, because she has learned that this is simply what she must endure to keep showing up." The room was so quiet now you could hear the hum of the lights. "Every one of you who's young," Ellison said, "listen to me. The people who came before you didn't build this so you could mock them. They built it so you'd have somewhere to stand. Winnie doesn't owe this company her dignity. This company owes her its existence." He looked at her silver-haired, unbowed. "I'm sorry, Winnie. I let this happen, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left here making sure it never happens again." Winnie didn't cry. She just looked at him steady and knowing and gave him the smallest nod, the same nod she'd given a janitor on the 7th floor. And Ellison understood that she'd known. Somehow, someway, this remarkable woman had known. He took a breath, because now came the hard part. Now came the truth about himself. "You're probably wondering," he said, "how I know all this. How the CEO, who most of you have never spoken to, suddenly knows the private struggles of people 3 and 4 levels down." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph and held it up. "This is how." The screen behind him lit up with the same image, blown up enormous. A man in a janitor's uniform, cheap boots, a beard, thick glasses, pushing a cleaning cart through the lobby of Halcyon Systems. For a moment, nobody understood. And then, slowly, like a wave moving through the room, they did. Gasps, whispers, hands over mouths. Because the man in the photograph was unmistakably, impossibly, the man standing on the stage. "For the past week," Ellison said, "I have not been at a leadership retreat, as some of you were told. I have been here, among you, as Charlie, the new janitor from facilities." The room erupted not in noise, but in a kind of stunned electric silence that was louder than any shout. "I mopped your floors," Ellison said. "I emptied your trash. I held doors you didn't see me hold. I cleaned up spills while you talked over my head about things you thought no one important was listening to." He let that land. "And I learned more about this company in 1 week down there than I learned in 20 years up here. I learned that we have become a place I don't recognize. A place I'm ashamed of. A place I built and then abandoned to become something cruel." His eyes found the front row. "Adele," he said, "would you come up here, please?" And the whole room turned to look at the head of operations whose face had gone the color of ash. She didn't move at first. Couldn't, maybe. Because the understanding was crashing over her in real time. The janitor she'd screamed at the man she'd stepped over the puddle. She'd berated the memory, rearranging itself into horror behind her eyes. "That was you," she said. Not a question. Barely a whisper, but the microphone caught it. On the executive floor. The one I... Yes, Ellison said gently. It was me. She rose, walked to the stage on legs that didn't quite work, and stood beside him, waiting for the blade to fall, because she knew everyone knew that a public execution was coming, and she had earned it, and there was nowhere left to hide. Ellison looked at her, and here was the moment. Here was where the story could go one of two ways. Where he could destroy her in front of 800 people and let them cheer. Where justice, the loud and easy kind, was his for the taking. Except that wasn't the truth. The truth was more complicated than a villain and a hero. The truth was that he remembered. 4 years ago, Ellison said, and his voice was quiet now, and the whole room leaned in to hear it. I promoted this woman. Do you know why? Adele stared at the floor. Because she was the most passionate person in this building, Ellison said. Because she stayed late mentoring the young ones. Because she gave a speech at the company retreat, some of you were there, about how everyone at Halcyon mattered from the mail room up. And she meant it. I watched her mean it. He turned to her. I remember who you were, Adele. I remember the woman who cried when we had to lay someone off in the early days because she cared that much. What happened to her? Adele's composure shattered. Because it's one thing to be condemned. You can steel yourself against condemnation. But it's another thing entirely to be remembered to have someone hold up the mirror of who you used to be before the pressure hollowed you out. I don't know, Adele whispered. And the tears came, and she made no move to stop them. I don't somewhere. It got so hard, and the targets kept climbing, and I told myself I had to be tough. I had to be ruthless, or I'd get eaten alive. And She looked out at the crowd, at the people she'd terrorized, and her face broke completely. I became someone I hate. I'm so sorry. To you. She turned to Ellison. But mostly to all of you. To every person I made feel small. I'm so sorry. I don't have any excuse. I just lost myself. And Ellison did something then that no one expected. He put his hand on her shoulder. The way he'd put his hand on Sylvester's shoulder in the accounting wing. The way you touch a person who is drowning. I lost myself too, he said. Loud enough for all of them. That's the thing I need you to understand. I'm not up here because I'm better than Adele. I did the exact same thing she did. The only difference is I got a chance to go down and remember. And now I'm giving her that same chance. Because people can't be scared, I have to believe that. Or none of this means anything. The room was weeping now. He could feel it. 800 people who had spent years being afraid, being invisible, being ground down, watching their CEO stand on a stage and choose mercy over spectacle, truth over vengeance, the hard road over the easy one. Adele turned to him, tears streaming, and she couldn't speak, and she didn't have to. She just nodded. A promise. A beginning. And then, from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, a single sound. Clapping. Ellison looked up. And it was Desmond. Of course it was Desmond. On his feet, tears on his face, clapping for the truth, for the mercy, for a company that might finally become what it was always supposed to be. And then another pair of hands joined him. And another. Coretta standing. Winnie standing in the back, clapping with those steady hands. Sylvester weeping openly on his feet. Row after row, the whole auditorium, rising 800 people, standing and clapping and crying, and the sound of it filled the room like water filling a vessel that had been empty for far too long. Ellison stood in the middle of it. This flawed, ordinary, extraordinary man who had climbed too high and found the courage to come back down. He raised his hand slowly, and the room quieted. "I don't want your applause," he said gently. "Not yet. I haven't done anything yet. Applause is for after." He looked out at them, all of them, his people seen at last. "What I want is your help. Because I broke this, and I can't fix it alone. I need every one of you, from the newest hire to the ones who've been here since the beginning, to help me build the company. We should have been all along." He paused. "The kind of place," he said softly, "where nobody has to be invisible to survive, where the person who does the work gets the credit, where being kind isn't weakness, and being old isn't a joke, and telling the truth doesn't get you punished. The kind of place," his voice broke just slightly. "My wife once cleaned at 3 in the morning, praying somebody upstairs would remember she was human." He looked at them, at the faces from his notebook, at the whole aching, hopeful human weight of the thing he'd built. "I remember now," Ellison said. "God help me. I finally remember, and I promise you I will never forget again." The applause that followed didn't sound like the first. The first had been shock. This was something else. This was hope. And backstage unseen, a gruff woman in a maintenance uniform stood in the shadows of the wings, arms crossed, watching the man she'd known as Charlie become the man he was always meant to be. Alma didn't clap. She just smiled, private, satisfied, and slipped back down toward the basement, toward the floors that still needed cleaning, carrying with her the quiet knowledge that she'd been right about him all along. He hadn't lost the way he looked at people. The applause faded. But the hard part didn't, because that's the thing nobody tells you about redemption. The speech is easy. The standing ovation is easy. It's the next morning that breaks you, and the morning after that, and the slow grinding, unglamorous work of actually becoming the thing you promised to be. Ellison learned that fast. The Monday after the auditorium, he came in expecting a company transformed. Sunshine, gratitude, a workforce holding hands and singing. Which he'd laugh about this later was exactly the kind of naive nonsense a man thinks when he's spent a week feeling like a hero. Instead, he got resistance. Because 800 people don't heal because one man made a good speech. Some of them had been hurt too long to trust it. Some of them had built whole careers on the old cruelty and weren't about to hand back the power. And some of them, the ones who'd laughed in the cafeteria, the ones who'd called Winnie a fossil, went very quiet and very careful, waiting to see if this was real or if it would blow over like weather. The first week, half the middle managers treated the reforms like a suggestion. He announced an anonymous reporting line, and a manager in sales told his team with a wink that anyone who used it would be remembered. Ellison found out, and Ellison did not wink back. He called that man into his office and told him quietly that the culture had a new set of rules now, and the door was that way if he couldn't live with them. The man lived with them. Barely. Because real change isn't a moment. It's a war of inches. And Ellison, who had spent 20 years winning by charging forward, had to learn a slower, harder kind of victory. The kind you win by showing up. Every day. And meaning it. Every day. Until the meaning finally sinks in. So he showed up. He started something he called Coffee with Ellison. No agenda. No managers hovering. Just him, a pot of coffee, and whoever wanted to sit down and tell him the truth. The first session. 3 people came. 3 out of 800. And they sat there, stiff and suspicious, waiting for the trap. But there was no trap. There was just a man who listened, and who remembered their names the next time. The second week, 12 people came. The third week, he had to move it to a bigger room, because word got around. Word always gets around. And the word was he's actually listening. He actually changed things. And slowly, one careful soul at a time, the building began to exhale. Sylvester was first. Of course he was first. Because Ellison couldn't wait on that one, couldn't let a good man lose his house for one more day. He'd called Sylvester into his office the morning after the auditorium. And Sylvester had come in, braced the way he always came in, braced a man who'd learned to expect the blow. "Sit down," Ellison had said. And then he'd slid a folder across the desk, and Sylvester had opened it, and went very still. Inside was a raise, a real one, and a note about a hardship fund the company was creating that Ellison was personally seeding for employees drowning in medical debt, and a number at the bottom that covered the back payments on his house. All of it. Every dollar. Sylvester didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at the paper, and his shoulders started to shake. And this time Ellison didn't reach out. This time, he just waited. Because some tears, a man has to cry on his own. "I don't," Sylvester finally managed. Why me? Because you gave this company 11 years, Ellison said. And it gave you a pamphlet. That's not who we are anymore." He paused. "How's your wife?" Sylvester looked up, eyes streaming. "She's the new treatment's working. Slowly. But it's working." "Then go home tonight," Ellison said. "Be with her. And this weekend," he smiled. "Doesn't your daughter have a school play?" Sylvester froze. "How did you mentioned it. When I was Charlie." Ellison's voice went soft. "You said you'd forgotten how good it feels to be present for those moments. So go. Be present. That's an order from the CEO." And that Saturday, in a school auditorium across town, Sylvester sat in the third row and watched his daughter perform. And he cried through the whole thing. Not from grief this time, from the almost unbearable gift of being there, of being a father who got to show up. Because a stranger with a mop had asked him a question nobody else had bothered to ask. Coretta was next. Ellison walked onto the finance floor one morning as himself, now in his suit, but moving through the space the way Charlie had moved, seeing it all of it, and he stopped at her desk. "Coretta," he said, "walk with me." She followed him, wary up to a floor she'd never had reason to visit. To an office. A good one. With a window and a door, and her name already on a plate beside it. She stared at it. "I don't understand." "Head of Financial Operations," Ellison said. "The promotion you should have had 3 years ago, and 2 years ago, and last year." He watched her face. "The team reports to you now. You've earned every inch of this, and everyone who's honest has always known it. I'm just the one who finally said it out loud." Coretta put her hand over her mouth, and Ellison saw the years of it, the 3 rejections, the drinks she'd skipped, the games she'd missed, the excellence that had gone unwitnessed in the dark of every early morning. He saw all of it move across her face at once. "My son," she whispered. "With this I can afford the after-school program. I won't have to choose anymore. Between the work and—" She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. "Go call him," Ellison said gently. "Tell him his mother's a vice president now." And she did. Right there in the hallway, she called her boy, and Ellison walked away to give her privacy, and behind him, he could hear her voice cracking with joy as she told her son the news. The sound of a woman who had been invisible for so long finally stepping into the light. But the one that mattered most to Ellison, the one that healed something in his own chest, was Winnie. He'd thought about it for days. What to do for a woman who'd given so much and gotten mockery in return. A raise felt insulting. A plaque felt hollow. Because you can't repay 2 decades of faithfulness with a gift card and a handshake. So he gave her the only thing worthy of her. He gave her her wisdom back. He created a new role. Senior advisor, mentor to the entire junior workforce. Every new hire, every young engineer, every kid fresh out of school who thought they knew everything, they would now spend their first month learning from Winnie. From the woman who'd been there since the burnt coffee days. From the living memory of what the company was supposed to be. He told her in her corner. The same corner everyone's desk had pointed away from. "You want me to teach them," Winnie said slowly. "The young ones. The ones who called you a dinosaur," Ellison said. "Yes, I want them to learn that the dinosaur built the world they're standing on. I want them to sit at your feet and understand that everything they think they invented you were doing before they arrived." He smiled. "I want your name to be the one they remember, Winnie, not the boys who mocked you. You." And Winnie, dignified, unshakable. Winnie, who hadn't cried when they laughed at her, put her weathered hand over her eyes, and her shoulders shook. Just once. "All these years," she whispered. "I waited all these years for someone to see it." "I'm sorry it took so long," Ellison said, "but I see it now, and so will they." The first young engineer assigned to Winnie was one of the boys who'd called her a fossil. Ellison arranged that on purpose, and he watched weeks later as that same young man walked out of a mentoring session, looking humbled and awed, muttering to a co-worker that he had no idea how much that woman knew. That she'd solved a problem in 10 minutes that his whole team had wrestled with for a week. The dinosaur, it turned out, remembered where all the bones were buried. And then there was Adele. The hardest one. Because forgiveness is easy to give in a speech and hell to live out in practice. And there were people, good people, hurt people, who didn't want Adele forgiven at all. Who wanted her gone. Who came to the coffee sessions and asked Ellison point blank how he could let her stay after everything she'd done. And Ellison understood. He did. Because part of him wanted her gone too. Except he kept coming back to that mirror. To the version of himself he'd met in the basement. To the plain fact that the only difference between him and Adele was a mop and a week, and a wife who'd once cleaned floors at 3 a.m. So he didn't fire her. He demoted her. I took her out of operations, stripped the power that had let her wound people. And then he did something stranger. He asked her to help rebuild the very thing she'd broken. To design and teach, of all things, a course on leadership. On the kind that lifts people up instead of grinding them down. "You want me to teach leadership," Adele said, incredulous. "After what I did, people will laugh." "No," Ellison said. "They'll listen. Because the best person to teach you how not to lose yourself is someone who lost herself and found the way back. You're not going to stand up there and pretend you were always good, Adele. You're going to stand up there and tell them exactly what you became and how much it cost. And you're going to help them not do the same." She stared at him for a long moment. "You're a strange man, Ellison Vance," she said finally, and there was something almost like wonder in it. Anyone else would have destroyed me. Anyone else, Ellison said quietly, hadn't just spent a week on their knees learning what it feels like to be destroyed. Go teach Adele. Earn it back, one class at a time. And she did. It wasn't easy. And it wasn't fast. The first few classes, the room was cold and skeptical, and half the people came just to watch her squirm. But Adele stood up there, week after week, and told the truth about who she'd become. About the speech she'd once given on dignity and how far she'd fallen from it. About the janitor she'd stepped over, who turned out to be the man who owned the building. And slowly the room warmed. Because there is nothing more powerful than a person who has done wrong, admitted it fully, and chosen to become better in public where everyone can see the cost. Ellison passed her classroom sometimes on his way through the building, and he'd catch her eye through the glass. And she'd give him a nod, not the cold, dismissive nod of the old Adele, but something real, something grateful. The nod of a person who'd been given a second chance and knew exactly what it was worth. The weeks became months, and Halcyon Systems became slowly, painfully, beautifully, a different place. Not perfect. Ellison had learned better than to expect perfect. There were still bad days. Still people who resisted. Still moments when the old cruelty tried to creep back in through some unguarded door. But the difference now was that people fought it. People noticed. People said something. Because the anonymous line was real, and the promotions were fair, and the man at the top actually listened, so the culture, inch by inch, healed itself. And one afternoon near the end of it all, a young woman knocked on Ellison's open door. He recognized her vaguely. Priya, a junior developer, one of the ones who'd been talked over in meetings, one of the quiet ones whose ideas got buried under louder voices. She stood in his doorway, clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield, terrified, brave. "Mr. Vance, do you have a minute? I have an idea. And in the past, nobody really well. But things are different now. So I thought, come in," Ellison said, setting down his pen. "And it's Ellison. Sit. Tell me everything." And she did. Nervous at first, then faster, then glowing, the words tumbling out of her. An idea about accessibility. About redesigning their flagship product so that people with disabilities, the blind, the deaf, those who couldn't use their hands, could use it fully, easily, with dignity. An idea she'd been carrying for a year. An idea she'd tried to share 3 times and been talked over 3 times. And Ellison listened. Really listened. The way Charlie had listened. And as she spoke, something lit up in him. Because the idea was good. No, it was brilliant. The kind of thing that could change lives and open markets and remind the whole company what technology was actually for. "Priya," he said when she finished, "why haven't we done this already?" Her face fell just slightly. "I tried. In the past, my ideas weren't, they didn't really get heard." And there it was again. The old wound. The talented voice buried. "Not anymore," Ellison said. "I want you to present this, next week, to the whole product team, and I want you leading it." He watched her eyes go wide. "This is your idea, Priya. You're going to see it through. And someday when you're the one sitting in a big office, I want you to remember what it felt like to be talked over. And I want you to make sure it never happens to anyone on your watch." She stared at him. "You really, he said. "Now go. Before I start crying in my own office and ruin my reputation." She laughed a startled, delighted laugh and practically floated out the door. And Ellison sat there alone in the quiet of the office he'd nearly forgotten how to deserve. Because that was it. That was the whole thing. A young woman with a good idea and the courage to knock walking into a room where for the first time someone would actually hear her. That was the company he'd wanted to build all those years ago, in the room that smelled like burnt coffee. That was the dream he'd lost and crawled through a basement to find again. That evening, he took one last walk through the building before heading home. He passed the finance floor where Coretta was leading a meeting, her hands moving with confidence, her team leaning in to listen. He passed the break room where Desmond was laughing with a group from 3 different departments, easy and warm. He passed Winnie's corner where 2 young engineers sat rapt, taking notes, learning from the woman they'd once mocked. He passed a classroom where Adele stood teaching, humbled and human, giving away the hard-won wisdom of her own fall. And finally, he found himself in the lobby, where it had all started, where a janitor named Charlie had once stood invisible, holding a mop, watching the world walk past. He stopped in front of the wall, the one with the company's mission statement carved in glass words he'd written 20 years ago, and long ago stopped seeing. We believe in the power of technology to improve lives, and in the power of a workplace to bring out the best in every person who walks through these doors. He read it slowly, all the way through, for what felt like the first time. And then he caught his own reflection in the polished marble floor. And for just a moment, a trick of the light, a ghost of the week that had changed everything. He didn't see the CEO in the expensive suit. He saw Charlie, the janitor, on his knees cleaning a floor, learning how to see. Ellison smiled at the reflection, because he understood now that Charlie hadn't been a disguise. Charlie had been the truest version of him he'd worn in 20 years. The version that noticed, the version that listened, the version that looked at a weary old woman and a broken man and an exhausted mother and saw in each of them a whole and precious human life. He would never take that off again. Outside the evening had turned soft and golden, the last light of day washing the city in warmth. And Marion was waiting for him at home, the woman who'd cleaned office towers at 3 in the morning and never told him the woman who'd sent him down into the dark with a packed lunch and a single instruction. Look at them, like they're people. Because they are. He drove home to her, lighter than he'd been in years, and when she met him at the door, she didn't have to ask how it went. She could see it in his face, in the way he held himself, in the peace that had settled over a man who'd been lost and found his way back. "Good day," she asked anyway. "The best," Ellison said, pulling her into his arms. "We're building at Marion. The real thing this time. The place you deserved to work at all those years ago at 3 in the morning." She pulled back and looked at him, and her eyes were shining. "That's the man I married," she said softly. "The one who sees people, not numbers, not charts, people." And Ellison held his wife in the doorway of their home, in the golden light of an ordinary evening. And he thought about all of them. Sylvester in the 3rd row of a school play. Coretta calling her son. Winnie teaching the ones who'd mocked her. Adele finding her way back. Priya floating out of his office with her whole future suddenly impossibly open. Because that was the thing he'd learned down in the basement on his knees with a mop in his hands. That leadership was never about the view from the top. It was about who you carried up with you. That the measure of a person was never the title on the door or the name on the wall. It was whether the invisible ones, the people who cleaned the floors and caught the errors and stayed until 3 in the morning, finally felt seen. He held Marion a little longer, and outside the light went gold, then amber, then soft and blue, over a company that had remembered its own heart, and the man who'd had to lose himself all the way down to the basement floor before he could finally truly find it again.